Hello everyone, my name is Wayne, and my Disney Infinity ID is Sumerian. Welcome to Fun with Logic, where we will be going into the toy box and doing some more advanced connections of the Creativa toys, just to see what we can make Disney Infinity 2.0 do for us. Hello everyone, welcome to my latest tutorial. This tutorial we're going to be doing some basic block animation, and the real purpose of this tutorial is to show what we can do if a time delayer is not quick enough for what we're trying to accomplish. So really this is about a time delayer when 1 second is too long, because that is the slowest you can make a time delay. So what I have done right here currently is I have set up a series of logic gates that are tied to this eyeball over here. And the output of each of these four is set up to a different position. Each of these buttons is hooked up to the logic gate in front of it. So the first logic gate closes the eye a bit, the second one closes it all the way, the third one opens it a bit, and the fourth one opens it to that point. And what we're going to be doing in this tutorial is making that eye blink. Now the speed I was pushing those buttons at is obviously way too slow, and we're going to demonstrate later what it looks like if you use a time delayer. But the question some people might have is, well, why don't you just tie everything together, because then it'll be really quick. So what I'm going to do, just to show you, is I'm going to tie the output of the first logic gate, not to the button, to the input of the second, and the output of the second to the input of the third, and then the output of the third to the input of the fourth. And what that should do is it should change the color of the first one, then send a signal to the second one to change the color of the eyeball from this logic gate, then send to the third. But unfortunately what's going to happen is it's going to happen so fast, because there's no delay whatsoever, that we aren't going to see anything happen when we push that button. And just to prove to you that this is working, I have tied them together right, I'm going to disconnect the last logic gate from this button, so that when I push the button, because this one is the second line, or the second row becomes pink, this one is the third row becomes pink, this one is the bottom row returns to the normal color. So it's going to happen so fast that what it's going to look like is we're only going to get the middle row will become pink. We won't see the rest of the animation just because it happens instantly. And there, the middle row became pink because it's happening too fast. So what can we do to fix it? Let me remove these. Okay, so what we're going to do, these should all work again. Down, bottom. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to demonstrate a 1 second time delayer. And I'm going to remove a couple of these buttons. And what I'm going to do is put in a time delayer for each of these. So I'm going to set it up so that when I push this button, it will send an input to this guy, but it will also send an input to the time delayer. And time delayers always start with a default of 1 second, which is the fastest they can go. So now the first logic gate will do its thing, and this timer will start, and when its delay is over, it will input to the second one, and it will also input to the next time delayer. And then when this time delayer is up, it's going to input to the third one, and it's also going to start the third time delayer, which will input to the fourth one, giving us a nice beautiful blink animation. Except, as we can see here, it's probably going to take about 4 seconds to complete. Let's put away the wand and let's watch the magic. Wow, that was a nice beautiful blink, except for the fact that it took forever. And that's not how anything blinks, that just looks wooden, static, and I don't like it. So what can we do to make that happen faster than these time delayers will allow? But as we saw before, we can't just tie these logic gates to each other to just push this signal down, because it happens too fast. So We need to be faster than time delayers, but slower than just direct connections. And I'm going to show you how we're going to do this. And how we're going to do this is we're basically first going to build let's call it an animation circuit. And how we're going to do that is, surprise, surprise, a logic chain. People would almost think I like logic chains. So this is the beginning of our animation, this first one. So we're going to make the ones that already have these color changing blocks programmed in the chain. So since the color change happens on the output, we're going to send input blocked into the input of that one, and so on. Okay, so now if it's open, it'll do the color change for this logic gate. If it's closed, it'll pass the signal on. If you don't know how logic chains work, look at some of the other tutorials. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But what we want to happen is we want, when this guy is changing the colors, we want him to then close. And the easiest way to do it is we'll send him up to this logic gate as an input. This logic gate will always be open, so his output will close this logic gate. So then the next time an input comes in, it'll pass on to the next one, which will do the same thing. It's going to send an output to this logic gate input, and its output is going to close that logic gate. And then again, output to the input, input to close. Output to close. Now the last one, you don't need to do that in because we're not passing the signal any further down the chain. We don't need this guy to close. What we do need to happen is, since he's the last one and we want the animation to continue, we want the next cycle to start back at this logic gate. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to say, if you send out an output, open this logic gate. And we're going to say, if this logic gate opens, open that one. And if that one opens, open this one. We're basically just resetting the whole chain all over again, so it can do its thing all over again. We don't have to open this one again because we never closed it. We just told it when you output, reopen this guy. Okay, so now, if I push this button, every time I push the button, the animation should skip to the next part itself. So we should go to there, to the bottom, back up, and all the way up. That's proving that this logic gate is working. And let's just make sure it reset properly. It's doing it again. Excellent. That is exactly what we wanted to happen. So, now how do we make that happen at a quick pace? Because as we saw before, a 1 second time delayer does not make it look any good. Even just pushing that button as quick as I can doesn't look like a blink. Well, we are going to set up a loop, basically. And I'm going to put a logic gate in merely as a control. Because when you start looping things, you want a way to shut them off. So with the logic gate, when it's open, the loop will continue. When I close it, it will stop. That is just so I have control over this loop. And what we're going to do is we're going to loop in a very simple way. We're going to use a counter. And we're going to say, when the logic gate is open and it has an output, we're going to increment by 1 this counter. And here's where the loop comes in. When the count changes on the counter, we will send an input to this logic gate. If it's still open, it will then increment, which will send back, which will increment. It's going to loop. Beautiful. We have a little loop going on. How does that help our animation change? Well, we have a lot of control over this now. I can change this target count to whatever I want. And I'm also going to say reset on target reach, so I don't have to program in a lot more logic. So every time it reaches 10, it's going to reset itself, but it will also send out a target reached signal. So I'm going to say every time you hit target reached, send an input to this logic chain, which, as we just saw by pushing this button, has good control over itself. It will always know which the next one it wants to play in the animation is. So I need a Actually, I want two buttons over here. I want one button up here that, when pressed, it closes this logic gate, which, like I said before, will stop this loop. It'll stop the whole thing from happening. And I want this one to just send input into this logic gate, which starts our whole loop going. Now, if I push this button, we're going to see that eyeball start blinking. And I set it to 10, just so you can see we can control the speed at which this eyeball is going to blink. So I'm going to push this button. And I left the counter on just so you can see it flying away. See that the blink is actually going at a fairly decent pace. That's not too bad. I would want it a bit faster than that, though. The beauty of this is I can then go to the counter and say, okay, that was alright, but it was a little too slow, so I'm going to say the count reaches 5 before it sends an input instead of 10. And just so I can reset this thing, because I need to reopen this logic gate in order to have everything work again, I'll just do that temporarily. Set it back so that I can close it. And now when I push the button, this should happen faster. There. See, now that's a nice speed for a blink, I would say. Now, I'm just going to add another thing in here, because a blink generally does not happen non-stop. So I'm going to show you how I would actually make this blink actually appear more natural. What I'm going to do for that is I am going to use a time delayer. What I want to happen is I want the entire blink animation to run through, like we saw before, and once it's done, back at this last logic gate, I want to say close this logic gate, which stops the logic or the loop from going, which will stop the animation. And I also want to say output to this time delayer, start delay. And I'm going to actually want a second time delayer, because I have two things I want to do here. This one is going to be kept on its default 1 second, and when it completes, it's going to reopen that logic gate so that it would pass, or the loop would function if I send an input to kickstart it again. And I'm also going to say, when I send an output, start this time delayer. And this one I'm going to say, well, how often do I want it to blink? Let's say every 6 seconds it's going to blink. And when those 6 seconds are up, I'm now going to send an input to this logic gate, which has already been reopened by this 1 second timer. Now let's make sure everything will be happy here. I've got to reopen that logic gate right now. Now if I push this button, every time it blinks, or it's going to blink, and then 6 seconds later it'll blink again, and then 6 seconds later it will blink again. And that is how you do some block animation where you can control the time or the delay that you have in between each animation, instead of having to go with the default 1 second timer. This is Cimmerian. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. I hope it's helped you a little bit at least, and I hope you all have a great day.